Obviously, the auditory sense has to come from an external source, and that external source is sound waves. The sound waves are moving through the air. So my voice right now is creating sound waves. Those sound waves are going to go into your ear. The pinna of your ear is going to direct those sound waves into the external ear canal. Once they're into the external ear canal, they're going to impact the tympanic membrane or the eardrum. The tympanic membrane is then going to start to vibrate or move based on the sound waves that are hitting it. As the tympanic membrane moves, there are tiny little bones on the other side of the tympanic membrane that start to vibrate, and they start to move. So the vibrations that come through sound waves are now converted into mechanical motion of the auditory ossicles. And those auditory ossicles, after it goes through a series of 3 of them in mammals, is going to start to move a structure called the oval window. On the other side of the oval window is fluid. The fluid is either perilymph or endolymph. We'll get to that in a minute. But that oval window starts to make fluid waves. Those fluid waves are going to go into the hearing section and cause little tiny hair cells, cells that have hairs on them. The hairs are going to bend because of the fluid wave. As those hair cells bend over, that causes an electrical impulse to be generated, and that goes up through the auditory nerve to the brain. That's basically hearing, okay? The pinna is obviously the outside portion of the ear. Obviously, pinnas are different for the species. Some of them are floppy, some of them are erect, but their primary purpose is to funnel those sound waves so that it hits the tympanic membrane. This is the tympanic membrane. This that you see here, that's one of the bones. It's on the other side of the tympanic membrane, okay? The pinna is usually funnel-shaped, okay, to help guide those sound waves. The pinna is also used for communication, right? If you see a cat looking at you with its ears down to the side and flattened, is that cat communicating something to you?
Yes.
Yeah. So the ears can be a communication device as well. The ear, or the pinna itself, has elastic cartilage on the inside of it. There is the auricular cartilage, which is the big part of the ear. If you grab a hold of your ear, you can feel the cartilage on the inside of it, okay? Dog, cat, they all have the same thing. That cartilage is just one layer. And on either side of that one layer of cartilage is skin, okay? There is not 2 layers of cartilage in the pinna, only one. That's going to be important when we start talking about other things later. Then, as the pinna funnels down into the external ear canal, now the cartilage goes all the way around the ear canal. And that rounded cartilage is called the annular cartilage. The cutaneous tissues inside of the ear can either be haired skin or non-haired skin. Some dogs, some cats have hair that goes all the way in, some don't. Sometimes they don't even have hair on the outside of the pinna. The other thing about the skin is it oftentimes has ceruminous glands. The ceruminous glands inside the skin of the ear canals secretes earwax or cerumen. That cerumen can be excessive because some animals, like Cocker Spaniels, have excess ceruminous glands in their ear canals. So they produce a lot of wax, okay? The tympanic membrane is the boundary between the external ear canal and the middle ear. It is the drum skin, if you will. As it starts to vibrate in response to the sound waves hitting it, it's going to transmit those sound waves to the bone on the other side, okay? And that bone then is going to start to move. Now, inside the middle ear, once we've gone past the eardrum itself, now we get to the tympanic cavity. Inside the tympanic cavity is just air, but the lining is ciliated columnar epithelium. Okay? What do you think the cilia would be there for? Motion. It's going to try to get things out of there that don't belong there. In order to do that, it has to get it through the auditory tube. And the auditory tube, or the eustachian tube, is between the caudal part of the pharynx in the back of your throat, and it goes up into the middle ear. And if everybody wants proof of that, close your mouth, plug your nose, and blow. And what happens? Your ears pop because of that connection between them. That tube is there to help equalize the pressure from the outside environment to the inside of your middle ear. Okay? The pressure needs to be equal, otherwise it can get real painful. Now, like I said, the inside of the middle ear has some bones. One of them is attached to the tympanic membrane. That bone that's attached to the tympanic membrane is the malleus. The malleus looks somewhat like a hammer or a mallet, hence the name. The malleus is attached to the incus. The incus is also known as the anvil. The anvil is also attached to the stapes, or the sternum. And they're attached in such a way that when the mechanical vibration causes the malleus to move, it causes the incus to move, and that causes the stapes to move. The way that those are attached to each other creates something called an increased motion or lever system, so that the bones move more than the tympanic membrane did. And so that's what this is for. The tympanic membrane has a tiny little muscle that's attached to it. That little muscle helps keep the tympanic membrane tight so that it's able to respond to any sound wave that hits it. Okay? The tympanic membrane surface area, relatively speaking, is about 55 millimeters squared. Okay? So you've got an area that's, relatively speaking, like this. Okay? Then, those ossicles create a lever system. And what's a lever? Anybody remember basic physics? Archimedes?
It helps to lift something that you can't.
Right. What did he say? If you give me a place to stand and a lever long enough, I can move the earth. Because of the lever principle. So that lever system decreases the amount of motion, but it increases the amount of force at the other end by 30%. Okay? Now, the surface area for the stapes that attaches to the oval window right there is only 3.2 millimeters. So, if I'm using numbers, guess what's coming next? Math. Okay? And that is this thing called impedance matching. It's much harder to move fluid than it is to move air. So in order for that fluid inside the inner ear to move, the force that's applied to it has to be more than the force that came in through the tympanic membrane. So if we take the surface area of the tympanic membrane and divide it by 1.3, it'll show you that we have 22 times more force at the stapes face than there was at the tympanic membrane. Okay? So 55, anybody got a calculator?
Yeah.
Okay? 55 divided by 3.2 is what?
17.
Huh?
17.
17. 17 times 1.3 gives you how much more force we have. Okay? So it's just simple physics. So now it's telling me that when that stapes moves, it's creating more force to the fluid on the other side that's in the inner ear to make that fluid be able to move. Okay? And that's all because fluid has greater inertia. And what's inertia? Or
Force put upon
an object in motion tends to stay in motion unless acted upon by some outside force. That's only half of it. The other half is an object at rest stays at rest until an outside force acts on it. Well, water or fluid has more inertia than air does. So that means that force to act on it, to make it move, has to be a lot more than the force that creates movement of air. Everybody got it? That's what impedance matching is. Because we have to have the same kind of motion inside the inner ear as the tympanic membrane on the outside. Now, if you didn't have this system, a tympanic membrane and those bones that attach together and go to the oval window, your hearing would be much less acute. If you have a hole in your tympanic membrane, your hearing is going to go down because now that impedance matching is not there. If you don't have that stuff, you decrease your sensitivity to sound by 15 to 20 decibels. That's pretty impressive, especially when you think it doesn't take much to cause motion of the tympanic membrane. So if it's not there, how much more sound is it going to take to cause the oval window to move? The sound would have to be tremendous, okay? Now, anybody ever been to a rock concert?
Yeah.
You're in there and doing whatever. What's it like when you come out? Can't hear anything. How come? Because your ears have a protective mechanism to decrease excess sound, or it attenuates sound. I used to work at a chemical plant on the Salt Lake, Great Salt Lake. And what I had to do, my responsibility was to analyze the chemicals that they were harvesting out of the lake. In order to do that, I had to use a spectrophotometer. And it created a lot of noise because it literally burned the chemical. And as it burned the chemical, that chemical emitted a certain kind of light. I took a picture of the light that it emitted, and then I could tell how much chemical it was. Well, that machine was so noisy. It was unbelievably loud. We had to wear ear protection, but even still, I could always tell when I'd been around it, because now when I got away from it, that attenuation or that ability to decrease sound was still going, still active. So when you walk out of a rock concert, when I got away from the spectrophotometer, I couldn't hear as well, because that attenuation was still happening. It was still decreasing the sound. And it does that in a reflexive action through the stapedius muscle. The stapedius muscle is really important. One of the smallest muscles in the body. This little muscle attaches to those ossicles, so when it contracts, it decreases the motion in those ossicles, which then it decreases the sound that you're going to hear. The other sound attenuating muscle is the tensor tympani muscle. Those are the smallest skeletal muscles in the body. Skeletal muscle, what does that mean? Huh? You can control it. Anybody ever done that yourself? If you just take it and think about it for a second, you can make it contract inside your ear, and all of a sudden, it sounds funny. Right? Anybody ever done that? Okay? That's what that is. That will decrease the sound from an outside environment by up to 40 decibels. So that's why when you come out of a rock concert, you can't hear anything. It also decreases the background noise. So it saves your ears, it saves your inner ear from potential damage. If we look at the inner ear now, remember the stapedius is attached to the ossicles. The last ossicle in the line is the stapes, the stirrup. That stirrup attaches to the oval window, okay? So if we look at this, we see the stapes right there attached to this thing called the oval window. On the other side of the oval window is a fluid chamber. And there's lots of fluid in there. Now, anybody ever work with balloons, long balloons? If I fill up a long balloon with air or even water, and I squeeze this end, what's going to happen at that end? It's going to get bigger. Well, if there's fluid inside the inner ear, if I push on the balloon or the oval window, what has to happen someplace else? It has to bulge out. If I'm pushing it, it has to bulge out. Make sense? Well, that's what the round window is. And if you look at the oval window, adjacent to it is a round window. So, as this moves in and out, this bulges in and out to accommodate for the motion of the fluid. And all of that's inside of this thing called the bony labyrinth. The bony labyrinth has a membranous labyrinth in it. The labyrinth, the bone, is surrounding the cochlea, the semicircular canals, the vestibule, and it's full of fluid. So inside here, this big space are all of those membranes, okay? And there's perilymph inside that. So when the stapes moves, perilymph is moving on the other side, moving at the same rate as the oval window did. Everybody got it? Yes? No? You got to get this. I promise you, you need to know this. If the oval window is moving, on the other side of the oval window is fluid called perilymph. That perilymph has to move, and as it moves, the round window is going to bulge out. Just like the balloon. When you squeeze one end, the other end is going to get bigger. Okay? Now, inside of the bony labyrinth, surrounded by that perilymph, is something called the membranous labyrinth. The membranous labyrinth has this thing called the cochlear duct, which looks a lot like a snail. Okay? Inside of that membranous labyrinth is fluid. Okay? The other thing that's outside or inside the bony labyrinth are the semicircular canals. Okay? Now, when you look at the semicircular canals, think of the corner of a room. If you look at that, there's one plane going with the ceiling, one plane going down that wall, and one plane going down this wall. That's the same construction as the semicircular canals in 3 different planes. The semicircular canals are filled with endolymph. Okay? And then there's a thing called a vestibule. And the vestibule is made up of 2 things right there, and that has fluid in it as well. The semicircular canals and the vestibule are important for balance or the vestibular system. The membranous labyrinth or cochlear duct is for hearing. So that's why we have cranial nerve number 8, which is what? Vestibulo-cochlear. Balance and hearing. Okay? Now, let's look at the hearing part first. First, we're going to look at that cochlea. The cochlea is divided into 3 chambers. Okay? 2 of those chambers are connected. Now, think of that snail. Okay, what it looks like. Inside of that snail is fluid. Inside of that, there is a division. If fluid's going to be moving this way, it's going to be coming out the other way, right? It has to, because there's fluid inside of it. the fluid is going to go up and then come back down because it's like the snail shells. Everybody with me? Yes, no? Okay. Now, those chambers in there are separated into three parts. The scala tympani, or the tympanic chamber, the scala vestibuli, the vestibular chamber, and then the scala media, or the middle chamber. Okay? Now, inside the scala media, there is a specific structure called the organ of Corti. The organ of Corti sits on top of the membrane that separates the scala media from the scala vestibula, the tympanum. Okay? Everybody see how that is? Inside of this organ of Corti are the cells that have little hairs on them. Okay? And that's the sensory cells. And those sensory cells have something sitting on top of them called the basal membrane. Okay? Everybody with me? So this is what it looks like. The cochlea has endolymph inside of it, and that endolymph and perilymph can move the fluid. It moves through it. The organ of Corti, again, sits on top of the membrane. There's the hair cells, and then they have this funny little thing on there that is called the tectorial membrane. So as the hair cells are moving because of the fluid, that's basal membrane, the tectorial membrane sits on top of it, and it causes the hair cells to move, or the hair to move in the cells. Everybody see how that would work? As those hair cells bend, or the hairs bend, it sends an electrical signal through the cell up to the auditory nerve. Okay? Now, remember how it looks like a snail. Fluid goes in one side, the perilymph, the endolymph and the scala media is going to move in response to that. And the basilar membrane will move. Then it's going to come back out. So this is the snail basically unwound. Okay? So, oval window here moves perilymph. It's going to move this way, and it's going to go this way. Over here's the round window. It's going to bulge in and out. Inside the scala media is a different fluid called endolymph. The motion of the fluid outside and the fluid on the inside causes a change in the shape of the hair cells. Everybody see how it works? Good? Okay. So this is essentially hearing in a real simple nutshell. Sound waves coming in from the outside, go through the external ear canal, hit the tympanic membrane. Tympanic membrane is attached to the malleus. The malleus starts to move, which causes the incus to move, which causes the stapes to move. As the stapes move, we have impedance matching. 22 times the force is put in here. It causes the perilymph to start to move in waves. Then that perilymph is going to cause or transmit across to the endolymph and cause it to start to move. As it moves, the cells, hair starts to bend. And then that sends a signal off to the brain, through the auditory nerve. That's very simply how it works. Now, how can you hear low sounds versus high sounds? What's the difference? But what does it do inside the middle ear or the inner ear? Where does it cross? Does it cross way close, or does it go clear out to the end and cross? That's what gives you a different sounds or the different frequencies. The frequency of the sound wave will cause that fluid to move all the way up to the top of the snail or stay real close to the bottom. Make sense? All right, so that's hearing. Anybody have questions about hearing? All right, so now let's get to the other side. That's the vestibular system. when we look at the vestibular system, there's two kinds. There's something called static balance. Static means you're not moving, okay? The other one is called dynamic balance, or when you do move. Right now I'm standing still. How can I stand up straight and not fall over? Because of the static balance, okay? And gravity, how it works. If I move, I'm still not falling over. When I'm not falling over because now I have dynamic balance. The dynamic balance has 3 planes for motion. Those 3 planes that we just talked about in the corner of the room, okay? And what's inside of these membranes? Fluid. And that fluid starts to move, okay? So, let's start with static balance first. Static balance is going to be in the vestibule. And inside the vestibule, there's something called the utricle and the saccule. Okay? And those are the organs that have the hair cells that are going to move in response to static balance, or being still. So basically, what is the force that's acting on this? Gravity. Okay? The semicircular canals are for dynamic balance. So if you're moving in a certain direction, the fluid that's inside of those is going to go based on the direction of the plane. Okay? Everybody got it? All right, now let's see how it works. Inside that vestibule, the utricle and saccule, are tiny little organs called the macula. And sitting on the macula are little rocks. Okay? So, if anybody ever says you have rocks in your brain, they're right. Okay? These little rocks are called otoliths. And they sit on top of this macula, and as they sit there, they put pressure on the hair cells. Okay? So, if this was the macula and this was the utricle, if this one's at 90 degrees to this one, gravity says that these rocks are going to put pressure on those hair cells, so they're going to bend down, right? How about these cells? What's gravity going to do there? Put pressure this way. What if I turn it upside down? This is going to turn the other way, and then this is going to pull on those little rocks. The gravity will pull on it. That tension or that pressure on the hairs sends nerve signals to the brain. Okay? So the reason that I can stand here straight up now is because the little rocks are putting pressure on these cells this direction, and these are bending the hair cells this way. If I turned upside down and hung from my knees, it would be just the opposite. But do you think you know if you're hanging upside down? If I hung you upside down, would you know it? Even if your eyes were closed? How do you know that? It's right there. Okay? That's just 2 planes. Okay? So basically that's static balance. Everybody got it? Alright, now let's look at dynamic balance. Remember, there's fluid inside there. When there's fluid inside of there, as you move, what happens to the fluid inside? People often wonder why I have this. Okay? It's a little ball, and on the inside there's little glittery things. And I'm going to start to move. And once I stop moving, what happens? It's still moving. So just the function of moving is causing the fluid to move in a certain plane, depending on which way I'm moving. And there's 3 dimensions, okay? Based on the angle of those semicircular canals. Inside the semicircular canals, there's this little thing called a cupula. It's a gelatinous material that has hairs sticking up into it. As the fluid goes around in a circle, it bends that cupula in certain directions. The direction that it bends the little hair cells is going to send a nerve signal to the brain. Okay? That's dynamic now. Whatever, anybody a surfer? Go out in the water and get on a surfboard? Anybody ever done that before? Have you? Did you ever wipe out?
Yeah, because I can't serve.
What happens when you went under the water when you wiped out?
I stay down there for a bit until it passes
And then what happens while you're down there?
you're tumbling.
You're tumbling around and around. Anybody ever been on one of those rides at Disneyland or whatever that makes you do weird things? What happens as soon as you stop? Why? Because the fluid's still moving inside of your head.
Is that why
And it's-
you spin the other way? The way you're dizzy, you're turning the fluid back?
They're going back the other way. Because it bends those cupula over and it sends a signal to the brain. Does that make sense? Now, what happens when you first got tossed around and tumbled around? Which way was up?
I don't know.
How come?
That
It's got you all screwed up. How did you find out which way was up?
when I came up,
How do you know which way is up? How come you didn't go down? Because it's all screwed up.
I probably did go down.
You never learned this? I don't even surf and I know this.
Blow those.
Blow bubbles. You exhale. Bubbles are going to go where?
Oh,
Up. So that's up. What if you're in an avalanche and you get tossed around?
You spin.
You spit. And the spit will go down.
yeah.
Now you know which direction it is. You guys didn't know this?
I know, I'm shut up on fire. Yeah.
Hopefully you guys never get caught in an avalanche.
If I do, I know how to get out.
Okay?
When you get vertigo, why are you dizzy then? If you
Because of this.
Like, is it just the fluid building?
We'll get there. So, with the senses, okay, you have to know the 5 general senses, what their purpose is, and the basic function. With the special senses, you have to know the 5, know the purpose, and the basic functions of each of the senses we've talked about. Okay? Anybody have questions? All right, so now let's answer the question. I need a volunteer. I need 3 volunteers. Okay? 2 people are going to, you gotta move this table so it's back.